In 2022, a pair of former ball players and a talented young broadcaster were tasked with creating a college football podcast. These men promptly escaped into the mountains of West Virginia and got to work. If you want top-level football analysis, off-topic stories, and locker room humor, you're in the right place. You are In the Gun.
In the Gun, episode 103 of ITG, your new favorite WVU football podcast in the triple digits now. It's time for an Orange Okie preview here in the Gun. I am Wesley Euler with the best teammates in the business. We got the signal caller, Jed Drenning, our buddy Owen Schmidt going to be joining us here briefly. Jed and I will kind of knock out this intro, this open here, and then Owen will hop in for the Oklahoma State preview. This is the Oklahoma State preview episode of ITG. And as always, brought to you in part by our friends at BetOnline, where the game starts. Jed, real quick before we get into these headlines and our intro here, I started working for iHeartRadio and the Steelers in 2018. Okay, so summer of 2018, a little over 5 years ago. And at that time in 2018, iHeartRadio really had this initiative to get all of its hosts to start podcasts, right? It was, everyone. It's almost like if you don't have a podcast, you don't exist in media now, right? Especially sports media. So there's actually, for iHeartRadio, there was a guy who was the VP of podcasting. Like, that's a real position, that's a real title, that's a real job for iHeartMedia. Vice President of Podcasting. And he went around, he spent like a year going around to all the top 25 markets in the United States to talk about, to answer questions about, to podcasting, essentially. And I'll never forget, in 2018, I'm sitting in that seminar. It was, like a month or two after I had been hired. It was required for all of us that were hosts and that type of thing. I'm sitting there with our buddy Adam Crowley, right? Another passionate West Virginia radio host from my neck of the woods. And the guy said to us, I'll never forget this. He said, when you start a podcast, when you have a podcast, you're not really a podcast until you hit 100 episodes. That's when you've got your groove down. You've got your voice down. You've got some audience established. You've got some chemistry, some inside jokes, all these things that make a show, right? Well, he said to us, I'll never forget this, in 2018, at the theater at our iHeartMedia studios in Pittsburgh, he said, you're not really a podcast until you hit 100 episodes. Well, brother, we are there. We are rolling. And it's been a fun, 14, 15 months since we started this thing.
Where did it go, right? Again, we've talked many times about how this all started with a call from Believe. And then I reached out to Owen. The next thing you know, we're working our way through the summer, trying to get this thing rolling. You fell into our lap, and off we go.
Real quick, Andrew Caridi, of course, we all know Andrew and the great work he's doing with IMG, host pregame, postgame, all those things for the WVU football team, broadcast basketball and soccer and baseball and all those, right? Mm-hmm. Of course, TC's son, and my goodness, do a lot of ways that they look and sound and act alike. It's certainly an apple doesn't fall far from the tree, a chip off the old block type thing. I am in Hilton Head, South Carolina last summer. And Andrew texts me and he goes, hey, got this podcast thing going on. I was thinking I was going to be part of it, but with my job now, I'm not going to be able to do it. It's with Jed Drenning. It's with Owen Schmidt. Mind you, I've never met or spoken to either you or Big O at this point.
That's right.
And Andrew goes, would you be like, they asked me if I knew a good host. I thought of you before I connect you guys, before I give your information to Jed. Would you be interested? And I said, heck yeah, I'd be interested. Adam Crowley, who I just mentioned, him and I were doing a WVU podcast together. He got a job with another radio station across town, kind of like a McDonald's and Chick-fil-A type thing, if you will. So we couldn't do that podcast together anymore, as he was going to be working for a competing corporation. So the timing kind of worked. I told Andrew, heck yeah. And like 2 or 3 days later, I'm driving home from Hilton Head to Pittsburgh, which is like an 11, 12-hour drive. And my phone rings and it's Jed Drenning. And I mean, buddy, I think we spent about 90 minutes or 2 hours. You really helped me get through North Carolina on that trek back home.
Then I think I remember part of that. Weren't you coming through like Nicholas County? Like up to Summersville?
I was going to say, I think at the very end of our conversation, I was hitting, like, that's how long our conversation was I started in North Carolina and I ended in Summersville. Yeah.
First one ever. And
first one ever.
We as I tend to do, I have OCD with a lot of things I do. I over prepared, so I formatted the first several episodes through that season because I wanted us to be able to find some form of a groove. And then once it felt like we did, we kind of just tossed the format and we were good.
Yep.
But now it's a little more loose because we have a vibe for each other, and we know the content we want to hit. We know the flow and how we want it to work. But and Skylar said before, I think we were trudging along, pushing 60 episodes when he came on board. And
sounds about right.
Part of the idea, once we got Skylar on board, was we wanted to churn out more content. We had more to say. So we brainstormed some different ideas. Instead of doing 1 or even 2 episodes a week, like last year was the much more regimented recap, later in the week preview. Well, we wanted to toss a couple other things in this year, and we have, and you blink and we're over 100 already. So here's to 200. That's what Phil said the other day. He's like, hey, I hope I'm part of this when you guys hit episode 200. We're like, well,
that's
so
right.
do we.
So do we. Absolutely. Yeah. I'll never forget Skylar saying, look, all right, one, we need to, because before Skylar came on, it was just the 3 of us sitting on Zoom. I mean, we had no graphics, we had no name tags. It wasn't pretty. All right. It was clearly for audio, and it was just us and a black screen and nothing. Skylar really dressed that up well. I tell you what, I mean, costume designer, makeup artist of the year or something. Where's his Oscar?
Oh yeah.
And he was also like, you guys are doing these 90-minute, 2-hour episodes, and they're great, but you could chop that up into 2 or 3 episodes. It drives your downloads, it drives your views. It's more daily content for the listeners. So it's been these first 102 episodes have been a lot of fun. And whether you've been rocking and rolling with us since episode 1, or whether you just hopped in at, I don't know, what was the pit recap episode? Probably like 80 something at that point, right?
Yeah,
maybe
probably.
You were just all jacked up about a backyard brawl victory, and you were looking for something to sink your teeth into. We're happy to have you along with this thing. We really enjoyed it.
There's a reason, Wes, that we always say at the end of the show, what do we say? What's our tag?
Be an ear and tell an ear about your new favorite. And much like Conan O'Brien in the year 2000, we will always be your new favorite WVU football. It doesn't matter if we get to year 10 of this thing. We are your new favorite WVU football podcast.
And the reason we say that is, irrespective of how deep we seem to get into this, we invariably still find new comments, and they'll pop up every handful of episodes. How did I not know about this podcast? It's the best podcast for West Virginia fans out there. How did I not know about this? You got a brand new listener I'm not going to miss. So there's still people who don't know about us.
Oh, absolutely.
So be an ear, tell an ear. That's why we say that. Those aren't just hollow words. It's an actual request to the best listeners in all of West Virginia podcasting.
So one thing we ask of you, we don't ask much. We just ask you to be an ear and tell an ear about your new favorite WVU football podcast. Some headlines, as always, here on ITG to get us started. Jed, it's funny. We talked about this. We joked about this. We laughed about this on the Houston recap episode with Big Daddy about how, well, I guess we laughed about 2 things. The first was how still our stated goal, our new mission statement here in the gun, is to get you guys to stop having to pay for parking and to just get you to be able to jet out of that thing, the Clarksburg 500, to get you guys out of the friggin' airport without having to sit there to pay the toll at the gate, 1 person at a time. That's our mission statement, is to get that scrapped. All right. But the second thing that we laughed, that we joked about was, man, wouldn't we love to have a kickoff at noon on the road? I mean, we had to go to Penn State in that environment in prime time, right? We had to go to TCU in prime time. We had to go down to Houston, back to Texas again in prime time. Well, ask and you shall receive, my good friend, because finally the Mountaineers have a noon road kickoff. It will be next weekend, not this weekend. The game that is after Oklahoma State is BYU. and that will be a noon kickoff. And Jed, I love that for two reasons. Number one, because it's there. Well, just I like noon road games in general. I should get that out there. I know you do for your travel purposes. I like it because that's about the time that my daughters take a nap, so I can put them down to bed and I can get the like it's great. And then we can still have the rest of the evening and all that stuff. And I'm not trying to get the girls to bed while I'm watching the WVU game and all these different things. But that's a homecoming game for UCF, their first homecoming in the Big 12. And that's a place, the bounce house there, right, that they call it in Orlando. That's a place that can get rowdy for primetime games if you give them an opportunity. So, much like when you were probably Virginia Tech a few years ago and you see Morgantown at noon, you go, oh, thank God, that's so much better than having to go there in prime time when those people have all day to hydrate and get ready. I know you love this personally for your travel reasons. I like this from just a football standpoint of, hopefully you catch a slow, a late rising crowd down there in Orlando, not one that has had the whole day to prepare and get ready.
Yeah, there's two reasons that I always like early kickoffs on the road. One, you just talked about. I'm unabashedly selfish in the sense that
we're all selfish.
I want to get home. Like, we can have a noon kick in Lubbock, which is 11 local time there in West Texas. I'm literally on my couch in Davis at 9:00 watching another game Saturday night because we have to police escort out
to the
airport.
Can't beat
it. But reason number two, it's not so selfish. You just hit on it. The flattest crowds we see on the road, with a couple exceptions, are typically at noon. It's those early starts. Now, noon in Orlando is a true noon start. Noon in most of the Big 12 is an 11 o'clock start local. But this is a noon start, a noon kick in Orlando. So you kind of hope that they come out a little flat. You kind of hope that the students roll in a little late. You kind of hope that the bounce house isn't quite so bouncy at noon as it might be at 3:30 or 7.
Maybe they indulge in those Friday night homecoming celebrations a little too much,
right.
And they're all still rolling out of bed.
That's exactly right. And you talked about it in one of the previous episodes recently. Look, the Oklahoma State game might look like a bigger handful than it did a few weeks ago because they've really found a way to resurrect their season after that South Alabama loss, what they've done since then. But on the flip side, maybe the UCF game doesn't seem as daunting. I mean, if you look at their trajectory of Central Florida's season, they started off 3-0. Really, the big one in that was on the road at Boise. We didn't know what Boise was or wasn't, but it's always a tough thing to go out on the Smurf turf and try and win on the road. So they were 3-0. But since then, I mean, they've really hit the Big 12 wall. They went on the road and got bombed 44-31 by K-State in a game that really wasn't as close as the score might suggest. They had Baylor come to the bounce house, and that was an environment that seemed to favor them. They built that massive lead, and then they blew that massive lead. They were up 35-7. They ended up losing that game to Baylor. So how can that not deflate you in the bounce house? No pun intended. And then they go to Kansas, and Kansas drops a 50 spot on them, blows their doors off, and don't look now, but next up, they head to Norman, the Palace on the Prairie. So they might be limping into the West Virginia game, and we might catch them at the right time. Of course, we're not on the team, so we're allowed to look ahead. We can look ahead all we want.
That's right.
The game. So trust me when I say nobody in the facilities building is looking ahead. We are. So we can have fun doing that. But it's going to be – Tony and I were talking about this when we were at Houston in the day leading up to the game. The last time that we had a season with 3 new venues, and I put an asterisk, of course, by Happy Valley when I say new, was 2012. So
when we first
entered the big that we could think of, that when we first entered the Big 12. So this year, obviously, we're going to Houston. We've already been there. We went to Penn State, and off we go here in a couple of weeks to the bounce house. We played in Orlando. We played Central Florida in Orlando, but we played them at the Citrus Bowl. We didn't play on campus in the bounce house. So this will be a different animal. So I'm looking forward to it. But first things first, after the break, we'll get the Oklahoma State Cowboys and the handful they're going to be. But yes, I was ecstatic to. It's lining up perfectly. I love the 3:30 kick against Okie State. I love the noon kick against Central Florida. So hopefully, flat crowd, they're a non-factor. We get a nice win, and we're home early, and I can enjoy the rest of my evening.
Completely concur. As somebody who travels with the Steelers, as we've discussed on this podcast before, I'll be out in LA next weekend. I wish, To be fair, I wish every Steelers game was at 1:00, but especially the road games.
Oh,
especially
LA.
Hey, buddy. And hey, and I just wanted to mention this real quick. On the off chance that you are a Steelers / West Virginia person who lives in LA, Saturday I'll be at the Hermosa Beach Pier in Los Angeles doing like a 4-hour event with Steeler Nation Unite. It'll be at the second half of the Oklahoma State WVU game. So yes, either on my phone or in the bar, I will make sure the game is on. I'll be wearing a flying WV in some capacity. So like I said, I doubt that there's somebody that listens to this podcast that lives in Southern California that's also a Steelers fan. But if you are, come say hello to me at the Hermosa Beach Pier this upcoming Saturday.
We typically find ourselves, the broadcast crew at WVU for Learfield and MSN, we typically find ourselves doing some version of what you're describing, like at a bowl game. Maybe at a bistro in Orlando, or at the resort in Arizona, in Scottsdale, whatever it might be. But to do it in the regular season, I'm assuming that's because there's Steeler fans everywhere, and you just don't get to LA very often. Is that the case? Is that why you're doing that?
Yeah, absolutely. Honestly, I'm surprised the Steelers didn't do it for the Vegas trip as well too. Maybe the Houston trip. I guess Houston is a little different because at least they're an AFC team. I guess kind of same with Vegas. But yeah, those NFC teams. The Rams, the Niners, the Cardinals, right? Those teams, you only make those trips every 8 years. Every 4 years you play. So it's your place 4 years, their place 4 years. The Steelers always do these, these day before type gatherings, and they're crazy. I mean, they get hundreds of people who show up. And so I was actually planning on going to the USC-Utah game on Saturday night until I found out that I had these additional responsibilities now with this watch party and everything. We'll see. I might still go. I could probably get there a little before halftime, maybe midway or late in the second quarter. Yeah, and I'm a dork, right? I just want to be able to say I've been to the Coliseum before as well. I've been to the Coliseum in Rome. Now I need to go to the one in Los Angeles, right?
Got to hit both of them. I think of those shows, Wes, I remember we did one on Beale Street. We were at the Liberty Bowl. I mean, they're interesting places, and Mountaineer fans, as you might expect, always turn out in big numbers for them. But the one I remember, there was a bistro in Orlando, and I think it was in 2016, the 10-win season. We played Miami in the bowl game down there. But our administrators and our front runner, the people running point for us, they tried to explain to the bistro, hey, you better expect and be prepared for a large crowd. And they said,
I think you might have told me this story separately.
We're good. And they told them for the better part of 3-4 days leading up to that. And wouldn't you know it, they didn't really prepare for it. I mean, people were ordering, like my wife's food took an hour and a half. She's like, big deal. I'm just sitting here enjoying myself. But there were people out there in the crowd that were trying to get wings, and they had to wait 2 hours. And they're like, they did not have enough people. Mountaineer fans took that place over, and that whole place was overwhelmed. We're like, we tried to tell you, but they were thinking we were another fan base. We're not. We're West Virginia fan base.
The Orange Bowl in 2012. Were you at the Clevelander on South Beach for that same kind of thing?
No. I wasn't.
Okay.
I was
because it was
the Fountain Blue is where we stayed.
Right.
I didn't really. I'm trying to remember what.
So you guys weren't doing because there was like the pep rally at the Clevelander there on South Beach with the band and the team and all that.
Wes, that's back when we still had the old MSN crew, right? With Hoppy and Jeff Jenkins and the whole crew. And we did something at the Fountain Blue. It was, if I remember, it was like a balcony off to the one side in front of the ocean. That's the only thing that I recall us going for that Orange Bowl.
Because there was one of those rallies at the Clevelander, right, which is a big hotel bar complex right there on South Beach, and it was the same thing. It was like WVU fans, Mountaineer Nation, shut down a block of South Street. And
now, Wes, are you talking about like what they do at Jackson's Landing for the Gator Bowl? Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
See, this is different.
Same thing.
Our show's different.
Okay, gotcha. Okay,
that
makes sense.
Yeah, you're talking about the
but same concept, right? Like people were spilling out into the streets at this bar because they didn't expect all these people from West Virginia to be down in South Beach. It was chaos. It was awesome. I was there with my mom and my dad and my sister. And it was like it took us 30 minutes to get a beer. You know what I mean?
I'm telling you, Beale Street was packed to the hilt. It was everywhere we've gone. there are always these crowds when we do these shows that we try and warn people, but I think they consistently underestimate Mountaineer Nation. That's what it is.
Well, I got a feeling there's going to be a good amount at the Bounce House there in Orlando for that noon kickoff. So if you're a Orlando-based establishment that is planning on hosting WVU fans in 2 weeks, don't underestimate Mountaineer Nation descending upon your premises. Hey, thank you to our friends at Toothman Ford for presenting this episode of ITG as well, too. Big shout out to JR. We all know cars cost less in Grafton. They've got over 20 WVU athletes signed to NIL deals. You got to love it. So make sure you're supporting the people who support our student athletes and your new favorite WVU football podcast. Jed, before we go to break, final tidbit here for you. Winston Wright, of course, formerly of this parish, former WVU wide receiver and kick returner, ended up transferring to Florida State a couple years ago. Well, he is back in the portal as of today. Things haven't, I think, necessarily. Last year, he suffered a bad season-ending injury early on in the process for Florida State. Wheels never really got off the ground in terms of his time there last year. And then this year, again, I'm sure stories and things like that will start to come out, but clearly it just wasn't working from his perspective, from their perspective, whatever. The role, the snaps, the minutes, all those different things just weren't lining up for Winston Wright. Well, he has entered the transfer portal early this week. And Jed, I'm going to break this down for you just real quick, right? Because I know this is one of those things like and I'm not trying to insult you by saying this, but it's like, it's one of these things that unless you're in your early or mid 30s and younger, you probably don't understand the Instagram and the profile. And you hear this all the time, right? Oh, Kyler Murray took the Arizona Cardinals out of his Instagram bio. And, and this person took this off of this. Oh, my Joel Embiid took the Philadelphia 76ers out of his Instagram. What that means basically is any post that you've made in your history, we all know you can go back and delete things, right? But you can also just hide things. So when Winston Wright transferred from WVU to Florida State, he hid all the WVU references and everything on his Instagram page. You couldn't see him. The only person who could see him was him, Winston Wright, controlling the account. Until a few days ago, if you went to Winston Wright's profile, it was all Florida State stuff. Well, if you go to his Instagram profile right now, he has hidden, or I guess he could have deleted just straight up too, but no longer there is any of the Florida State content. And once again popping up are all the WVU pictures and videos that he posted in the past. So took Florida State away, hid all his Florida State stuff, and not reposted, but just, I guess, remade public is probably the best way to explain this. I'm really trying to, Jed, I'm looking at this right now like I'm trying to explain this to my mother, all right? I hope that was a good breakdown. Makes perfect sense. Once again, on Winston Wright's Instagram page, it's WVU stuff everywhere. So that obviously today on Twitter set off oh my goodness, could he be coming back? Does he want to be coming back? Is that just him? He wanted to get rid of all the Florida State stuff, so he remade public all the WVU stuff. But there's at least, I think, an interesting conversation to be had there around Winston Wright is in the transfer portal. That part we know for sure. And if he's interested, would you be interested in a return to Morgantown?
Well, let's start with this. The first question folks might have is, how can he transfer again? Well, here we go. Let's revisit the rules.
Yeah, good job.
One-time free pass. You get a one-time free pass as an undergrad. He exercised that free pass to leave West Virginia and go back home, closer to home, to play at Florida State. Now, the second time you try and transfer, one of two things has to happen. Either you have to be a graduate with your degree and be a grad transfer, and that's a free pass. Or if you're not, and you want a second undergrad transfer, you have to petition the NCAA for a waiver, just like you have to used to do every time you transfer as an undergrad. So he has, as I understand it, graduated. He's a grad transfer, right, Wes?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. So let's look at this. First of all, he was a playmaker for us when he was here. I think at different moments, it's amazing the things that kind of get burnt in your brain, the gray matter, and just occupy space. Like I remember the COVID year, and early in the season, we went out to Stillwater, and that was a very pivotal, critical game for us. So it was hard fought. They separated in the fourth quarter. But one of the things that kept us hanging around was a play that he caught an RPO from Jared Dagey, and I think Winston's still running. So that's one of the things I remember when I think of Winston. But the other thing I remember is the kickoff return against Baylor.
Long Island or Baylor, yeah.
Baylor, the unbeaten Baylor Bears. Now, if you remember, It was 17-14. The 2 touchdowns that night were Winston Wright on the kickoff return and a long touchdown from Austin Kendall to George Campbell. That was a very good, highly ranked, unbeaten Baylor team. We weren't supposed to do anything on Halloween night. We almost pulled the upset. Winston had a hand in that. He made plays for us. He was productive. What do you have, 120 or so catches in 3 years here? Our leading receiver, his final year, he pushed 700 yards. He had over 60 catches. So he transfers to Florida State. I don't begrudge him that. I mean, Winston was always a good kid, a high character kid. He was one of these guys that I remember when we signed him. I remember when he committed. We have the recruiting day show, the National Signing Day show that Tony and I always do, breaking down the class. And I talked to a number of these high school coaches that coach these kids leading up to that show to get their take on it. And his high school coach just couldn't say enough positive things about him from just from a leadership standpoint. Forget the skill and explosiveness and football side of it. He's just a good kid. So you wish him the best when he left. Now, you said the wheels came off. It never really materialized. I don't know if you know what happened, but you stumbled into a pun. Winston was in a car accident when he arrived at Florida State, and that kind of put him on the shelf for quite a while. And I think that impacted his development down there. And as you know, they've really returned to their former glory, and they're cooking with gas. I mean, they've got some stuff. There's some studs on that roster. They're deep. They're talented.
Like 70% of that roster is transfer portal guys, right? Like a crazy number.
They worked the portal well. And it made sense. A guy like him, he's closer to home. I mean, what you do when you look at the portal, you always understand the risk proposition of kids that aren't close within. I say close within a 6-hour, let's say, window of your campus, within a 6-hour circle of your campus.
Driving distance.
Radius. That's right, driving distance. So for a kid from Florida or Georgia, there's such an abundance of talent. Of course, you'd be remiss if you didn't pursue some of that talent to help yourself out. But at the same time, they study these things. Every school in America has these numbers. And the further the kid gets away from campus, the harder it is to keep him from the portal. Because there's somebody closer to home saying, hey, why don't you do the same thing you're doing, except on closer back to home down here in Tallahassee? So, again, I didn't begrudge him that at all. But it didn't work out or materialize the way he would have hoped. And what I find interesting, I don't have the participation charts for Florida State in front of me, all right? But at first blush, I'm looking at cfbstats.com. This portion of it's unofficial. But it looks to me, and I find this curious, he's caught 4 passes for 36 yards. But more important than that, it typically, if he doesn't participate in a game, it gives you the DNP did not play. But this has him listed as playing in their first 5 games. Why is that of consequence? Because you can play in 4 and take your red shirt and retain that year of eligibility. Well, first of all, everybody walking the earth who can fog a mirror was playing college football in 2020. That year didn't count. We've covered that ad nauseum. The COVID year didn't count. That gives everybody an extra year of eligibility. So as we stand right now, even without a red shirt, Winston Wright gets that extra year of eligibility, as I understand it, for any kid that played in 2020. So that would apply for him too. But had he only played in 4 games instead of 5, again, maybe he did. Maybe this isn't entirely accurate. They're not claiming it is. I'm just kind of reading into this because I just wanted to grab the quickest thing I could to try and figure that out. But that would mean if, in fact, he redshirted, he could theoretically have 2 more seasons if you count the 2020 COVID season, which didn't count. Plus, if he's
which didn't count.
Yeah, which didn't count for participation purposes. For eligibility purposes. So, they don't hold it against any kid working towards his 5 years to play 4. So that's what's interesting. So he has at least 1 year left because of the COVID year, unless I'm gravely mistaken. But this would, if he played 4 games at Florida State instead of 5, he could redshirt.
Sure.
Have 2 years left. But that I don't have the answer to.
According to the portal report, maybe I should have clarified. I said he's entered the portal. The portal technically still isn't open yet. It opens at the end of the season, but he has told Florida State and has told people around him that he's going to, and he'll enter his as a grad transfer too.
Yes, other staffs can now legally reach out to him. Once you're in the portal, that starts the official process.
No more tampering, right?
That's right. Yeah.
So certainly something we'll keep an eye on. This is another one of those stories that we will, that we will update, that we will talk about more But certainly one that had the attention of Mountaineer Nation early in the week. All right, let's get to our break here. We come back on the other side. It'll be time to talk a little Orange Okie. We're going to talk those Pokes, Mountaineers, big one, 3:30 this coming Saturday in Morgantown. Means a lot for both programs and kind of where they're at right now. We'll get into all that on the other side. You are in the gun.
Nobody supports the blue and gold Mountaineers like Toothman Ford. With over 20 NIL deals and counting, Toothman Ford continues to rally behind our student athletes. And it's time we rally and support the dealer that supports the Mountaineers. Not only does Toothman Ford offer the best prices in the state on pre-owned, their never over MSRP campaign on new Fords guaranteed to save you thousands. Drive with pride all season long, knowing you're supporting the dealer that fuels our Mountaineers. Toothman Ford, where cars cost less. In Grafton and at toothmanford.com.
For more West Virginia Mountaineer football content, be sure to follow us on Twitter at In the Gun Podcast.
For nearly 20 years, Fortis has been the nation's leader in providing guaranteed roof performance programs for commercial buildings. Fortis offers roof performance solutions that feature extensive initial and ongoing reconditioning for commercial buildings as an alternative to traditional replacement, with long-term performance guarantees that are backed by global leader Lloyd's of London. Fortis offers a comprehensive range of roof performance management programs that provide financial security, extend the life of our customers' roofs, and make a significant impact on ROI. Fortis is currently improving performance and increasing ROI for customers at more than 4,800 locations, with more than 140 million square feet protected, including many Fortune 500 companies that have turned to Fortis to save money, gain financial certainty, and extend the life of their existing roofs. Fortis has helped customers save more than $520 million in capital roof replacement costs for an average ROI of over 250%. To learn more, visit fortis.us.com. Fortis, roof performance and financial certainty guaranteed.
Let's go, Mountaineer fans. You're tuned in to In the Gun with Wes, the Runaway Beer Truck, and the Signal Caller.
Back in the gun here on your new favorite WVU football podcast. Wes Euler, Jed Drenning. We don't know what happened to Big O. He's got high school football stuff going on. Maybe his phone's at the bottom of the lake like it was last year. We never really know. But we're just going to continue to truck along here on this edition of ITG episode 103. It is, of course, our Oklahoma State preview. We had some fun with some topics there in our headlines segment. Hope you guys enjoyed that. But now it's time to get down to brass tacks. Of course, the Pokes, the Cowboys of Oklahoma State, coming to Morgantown with bad intentions after WVU was able to leave a sour taste in their mouth with that victory down in Stillwater at the end of last season. Jed, it's been a weird start of the year for Oklahoma State. Okay, they beat Central Arkansas by 2 touchdowns in their opener. Can't really take a lot from that. Then they go on the road down to Tempe against Arizona State and win by double digits. Okay, you're 2-0. You're feeling pretty good. Got a Power 5 win on the road. Then they come back home and get absolutely smacked, absolutely hornswoggled, and they lose by 4 scores to South Alabama. No, not Alabama. Not Auburn, South Alabama at home. Then they go to Iowa State and they lose by a touchdown as well, too, on the road. But back home, they lick their wounds against the Kansas teams. They beat K-State at home by a touchdown, and then they beat Kansas this past weekend by a touchdown as well, too. So it has been an all-over-the-place start to the season for Oklahoma State. I mean, there were those reports a couple weeks ago that a couple weeks ago that a bunch of players on their team were getting ready to quit the football program. I mean, it was looking like dark days. Now you've stabilized. You've gotten 2 home wins against Kansas and Kansas State, and you're going on the road to Morgantown. So I got a feeling, partner, this is going to be another one of those key moments games, right? Much like TCU, much like Houston. It's going to come down to the minutia of this one, right? So where are we beginning, my dear signal caller? What's the good stuff? What's the important stuff? What should we be watching for Saturday afternoon at 3:30?
Well, the reports of their demise were greatly exaggerated, obviously. And nobody nailed it more quickly than our buddy Phil Steele, who told us coming off the bye, don't underestimate Mike Gundy and the Cowboys with a ranked Kansas State team coming to Stillwater. When all the world was calling him crazy, Phil Steele's the one who said, watch out. and they righted the ship during that bye week. And you heard Neil talk about it in his presser this week. He's like, look, if you coach, fans look at the game one way. It might be impressive enough to bounce back from a South Alabama loss to playing well on the road at Iowa State and then beating 2 ranked teams at home. That might seem well enough, but when you really scrutinize and look at the little things they're doing better than they were early in the year from a coaching standpoint, it's pretty impressive. And the truth is, despite the fact that we have Phil Steele on the show each week, I don't gamble, and there's a reason. There's a reason I don't gamble, and I can come up with 100 reasons every weekend. This is why I don't put a nickel on college.
Hold on, Jed, you don't know when to hold them and when to fold them?
I love the song.
When to walk away and when to run?
Don't get me started. Now I'm going to have to do the whole thing on a warm summer's eve. Anyway, so South Alabama came into, and you just touched on it, came into Stillwater against a 2-0 Oklahoma team who had beaten Central Arkansas as they should, who had gone on the road and won at Arizona State. South Alabama came in and took this Oklahoma State team behind the woodshed. They ran for 243 yards on Oklahoma State. Now, all I could think was, okay, it's been a team that has been in transition in recent years offensively, kind of a revolving door of offensive coordinators, but Gundy's always made them work. But in this particular instance, the revolving door has been on the defensive side. For the third time in as many years, you're looking at a new coordinator in Brian Nardo. And once again, as you know, Gundy likes to do, he reached down to the smaller college level at the Division II level and pulled Nardo out of Gannon in the Pennsylvania State Athletic Conference. So it's a lot to ask in one off season to restructure, install a defense that's not a true 3-4. It is an odd back defense. So there's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of acclimation. There's a learning curve. So early in the season, it's one thing to get beat by South Alabama, but they got run on for 243 yards. Now, that's the same South Alabama team, and this is why I don't gamble, that just recently James Madison held to 27 yards rushing.
Jed, just don't gamble on 19 and 20-year-olds, all right? The adults are much more predictable.
Much more? Okay. I'll take your word for it. But so I asked myself, he did, in fact, circle the wagons following that loss to South Alabama. I mean, that could have tanked their season. And, yeah, all those reports were coming out. But, look, I got some, you might as well call them insiders, I guess, guys who are at Oklahoma State practice every day that I talk to. That's right. Sources. And I was talking to them as all the scuttlebutt about Gundy's going to lose the team's going to quit on Saturday. And he's like, this is nonsense, Jed. He said,
I remember you texted me about that. Yeah.
Yeah. You got some Oklahoma fans fan the flames of it, and they're really trying to increase the drama of it. He said, but we got to block and tackle better. That's what we got to do. He said, and that's what Coach Gundy's focused on. So they quietly snuck up to Iowa State, who is another team, and we'll get to this later on in the week, is another team that's kind of resurrected their season. But that was a point when Iowa State was playing better football than we thought. Well, they went up to Jack Trice, lost a tough game 34-27 after the South Alabama loss. Okay. Then they had the bye week that Phil Steele talked about. They regrouped. And what's interesting to me, it's the nature in which they beat these 2 ranked teams, first Kansas State and then Kansas. Kansas State, they got after the bye, and they came out and really jumped on them in a way that I don't think Kansas State expected. And what's fascinating, Kansas State, it's not like they shut them down. Kansas State ran for 220 yards on them.
Right.
Now, they struggled to throw the football. So they kind of had their way at the line of scrimmage. They pushed them around a little bit, but they made plays when it was critical, and they won that game 29-21. Now, Kansas, who, what was it, last week? They ran for 400 yards. They come into Stillwater, and you'd think, oh, boy, this Oklahoma State defense, Brian Nardo is going to struggle. He just got gashed for 220 yards on the ground against the Wildcats. What's going to happen here against Devin Neal and company? I'll tell you what happened. They held them to 90 yards rushing, the fewest in the Big 12 last weekend. Now, Kansas.
Now they gave up a zillion yards in the air, right? But
410. Yeah, that's just it. I mean,
to a backup quarterback.
Yes. Well, I guess he's a backup. Is he anymore? We don't know.
You know what? That's a good. Speaking of transfer portal in 4 games, that's a good point by you.
So Kansas State ran all over them, and they found a way to beat them. Kansas threw all over them, and they found a way to beat them. So when you look, okay, well, what are the cracks between the keys? What did they do differently from a situational standpoint? We'll get into the situational matchups here in a minute. But what did they do differently? Was there something special in the red zone? Did they crank out a bunch of touchdowns? Did they hold them to a bunch of field goals? How about on third down? No, nothing. It was kind of unremarkable in all those typically critical categories. If you're going to pull an upset, you got to do something in one of those categories. No, it was the oldest category in the book, turnovers. In the last 2 games, they're +5 in those 2 wins. That is what is most alarming. They have found a way to create turnovers where early in the season, they weren't having as much success in doing that. And against the West Virginia team, that as we talked about.
I was just going to say, give me that stat that you gave us after the Houston game.
Unfortunately, since the Baylor game of last year, so I think that's 12 games or 13 games, we have outright won the turnover margin once, and that was against Pitt. Now, there have been many times it was a draw, but I mean, think about this, Wes. We've now won 3 straight games without forcing a takeaway,
which is insane. This
is the type of thing that has to change when you're facing a team coming to town that's winning by forcing takeaways. So you're going to have to right the ship in that respect. And that's one of the first things that I tend to look at in this matchup is ball security. We talked about it in the Houston game. I even said this in the pregame. I thought that West Virginia would need to win the turnover battle to, make that game what it should be. It was only -1, but it was a pretty big -1, right? It was a 10, 14-point swing with the turnover in and out of Jalen's hands. We all know how that played out. So let's start it from a matchup standpoint. Let's look at West Virginia's offense against Oklahoma State's defense. Okay, let's small ball it. And again, let's get down to the critical situations that tend to help you have a puncher's chance to win football games. So let's start in the red zone. From a red zone touchdown perspective, West Virginia is really playing exceptional football despite the turnover, the interception to Houston. 73% touchdown rate is good enough for number 2 in the Big 12. In other words, when we breach the other team's 20, 73% of those trips result in a touchdown. That is winning football. I told Owen last week, those are the types of – here we go. Give me two. For those listening and not watching or enjoying the graphics on YouTube, the fireworks behind Wes. So 73% is kind of where Owen, Pat, and Steve, and those
rare air, Jed. Rare.
I mean, that's how you win games. You get the
you're talking Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid offense at their absolute best.
That's what you want to do is get there and hang there. So it's good for number 2 in the league. Meanwhile, Oklahoma State defensively, they're 11th. They're allowing a touchdown on 67% of their trips. And again, that's not what they did to beat Kansas and Kansas State. Nothing exceptional about that. It was the turnovers. So if we continue down the path that we've created, and we've given these reasons before, why are we so much better in a condensed situation, a condensed field than we were a year ago? Look, when you get in the red zone, the field shrinks. Everything's tighter, including the windows when you're throwing the football. So make your life easier by being able to push people around. Well, we have an exceptional offensive line. We're deep at running back. We have a couple tight ends we know and trust. And we have versatility at the quarterback spot. So that extra dimension of the quarterback run game makes you a little different. So these are the reasons that we've improved as much as we have. Now we have to continue to improve or hold serve, because that's where you want to be in that range. So from a red zone standpoint, when we have the ball and they're on defense, you would think the advantage would skew to us so long as we play up to our standards and force them to struggle. Now, from a third down standpoint, here's where things start to become a little better news for West Virginia. We spent the last several weeks talking about our struggles on third down. We struggled mightily on third down. We were going into the Houston game 13th in a 14-team Big 12 on third down efficiency from an offensive standpoint. Now, when you look at what played out against Houston, we were 13 of 19 on third down against Houston. And that's 68%, West. And I mentioned this in a previous episode. That 68% is the highest success rate we've had against an FBS team since 2012 in any one game. So that's winning football. Now, I really get granular when I look at these numbers. This is where I go nuts with some of the numbers, because the way that separate or categorize third downs. A lot of this comes from cfbstats.com. So I dive into there and pull the numbers out that I want to extract and then study them. So you have third and short, which is considered 1 to 3 yards, third and intermediate, which is 4 to 6 yards. And then you have third and long, which you want to stay out of. And I just counted it together as 7+. They have 7 to 9 yards and 10+. I just count 7+ as one category. I kind of lump it together myself and do it that way. Well, what we struggled at all year, the good news is we've been staying out of third and longs. So we had a third manageable, short, intermediate, but we weren't very effective at them. We were underperforming. So we were setting the table for makeable third downs, but we weren't finishing the job. We were doing the hard part, but not the easier part. Well, the good news is against Houston, when it came to 3rd and 6 or less, so counting those third and shorts, third and intermediates, we were 69%. So we were almost 70%. That is winning football. So when you look at whether we were throwing the ball, whether we were running the ball, it was all positive. Houston, when we threw the football in third and intermediate, we were 4 for 5. When we ran the football in third and 1 to 3 yards, third and short, we were 4 for 5. So these are all positive numbers that are leading towards something that you can absolutely win with. And that's what you need. Wes, you need to work towards something exactly like that.
Sure.
From a production standpoint. And one of the reasons that we were able to do that is for the first time all year, we were truly able to play pitch and catch. I told you off the air. We averaged 10.3 yards per pass attempt, not completion, per attempt. Now that's
you just had to drive a stake right through my heart, right? Because tell me when the last time we did that and lost a game was.
Well, that typically signals success. It's very hard to average 10 yards per pass attempt and lose. The last time we did it was 2018 and the 59-56 loss to Oklahoma. It's hard to do it. It doesn't happen often. So you're really setting yourself up offensively to have a big night. So the pass game plays such a critical role at all the key times when we needed to do that. But bear in mind now, we're trying to work out this running back rotation. JJ was out last week. He was sick, so he wasn't really in the mix. In Houston, you're seeing as much Jaheim White as you might expect, maybe more Jalen still in the mix. CJ's the front runner. He's the alpha in the room. Now, he's to a point where we've never seen him before from a carries in a season standpoint. How will we handle that workload the rest of the way? We're going to see, because we're in uncharted territory with a kid who was converted from tight end to running back just last year and has never spent his life learning how to treat his body and take the shots.
Had more carries this season right now, right? Jed still with 6 games to go than he ever had in his football career.
He had 87 all of last year. He had 86 going into the Houston game.
Right.
So the answer is yes. He's over 100. So now bear in mind, when you're talking about that rotation, who burst onto the scene and rain-soaked Stillwater last year with 155 yards and 2 tutties? That was Jalen Anderson.
Yep.
Jalen Anderson. Big effort by Jalen Anderson. So does he have another one of those in him against a very talented Oklahoma State defense that they're good in all the right spots? In other words, what they're going to do, and you probably heard Chad Scott talk about this, one of the things they're going to do is they're going to try and create the presentation that you can run the football against a soft box against numbers. But much like what we've seen out of John Heacock's Iowa State's odd stack, he breaks the stack, and those numbers aren't as soft as you would think, because sometimes you can have not even just 8, but as many as 9 defenders in the run fit. So that's a consideration. You really have to find a way. And we said this when we played those better Iowa State defenses. Look, just be patient enough and demonstrate the patience to understand that if you get 4 or 5, that's a really nice way of approaching things. A 4 or 5 yard pickup against a defense like this on first down, that's a win. So now you're heading in the right direction. And from a personnel standpoint, they get their safeties very involved. You're going to see number 9 flying around there, Trey Rucker. He has some size to him. You're going to see number 5, Kendall Daniels, 6'4", 213. So they get some size on the back end. And a lot of what they'll do with Rucker is funnel things in an odd stack configuration toward the middle, toward him, understanding that he's the aggressive type player that can, in fact, play downhill. And that's one of the things that jumps out when I watch them. Neil and the staff rave about their linebackers, and I agree, whether it's Colin Oliver as an edge rusher He has a dozen hurries. I mean, it seemed like every time I turned around watching tape, he's making life difficult for the quarterbacks they face. But he also has a dozen missed tackles. So he's not a guy who can necessarily play in space. He has a role in that defense, and that role is to make life chaotic for the quarterback. Okay, so you don't necessarily have to put him in space and ask him to do too much. They're going to do that with their other personnel. But one of the things that jumped out when I look even at their corners, Corey Black or DJ McKinney, not just their safeties, who are obviously big, physical, downhill factors. But when I look at Corey Black, DJ McKinney, you'll see number 2 and number 8 on the tape flying around. They can set an edge. I mean, they're physical. They can really hold their own, and they're pretty solid tacklers and pretty solid run defenders. So that's something to consider as well when you're looking at all this. But Trey Rucker is a guy who is physical, but as the old saying goes, sometimes God doesn't give with both hands. So when we're talking about old number 6, yeah, you want to keep an eye on him with his run fits and playing downhill. And if you're watching the game at home, and of course you have the radio turned up, listening to me and Tony and Dwight, if you're doing that and it looks like, wow, why can't you run the ball? They don't have anybody in the box. There's no defenders. Well, that's what they want it to look like. And then what happens is post-snap, those defenders are triggered, and they're all flying to the run fits. And the next thing you know, it's like dogs on a bone. And you have, 8, 9 defenders in that box area playing downhill. But Trey Rucker is one of those defenders that you see doing that. But the problem is, from a pass coverage standpoint, that's not necessarily the case. He's not as exceptional. And I've seen teams game plan against him and try and isolate him in certain situations. They've had some success in doing it. He is, in fact, their most targeted defender. Teams have thrown at him 29 times. If you want some of the numbers on him, 18 completions in those 29 throws for 333 yards. They're averaging 18.5 yards per catch against him. Pretty chunky, 4 touchdowns, no picks. So if you can find a way by moving your presentation around, and that's one thing that Neil and Chad and this offensive staff are exceptional at. They present the same play multiple ways, with shifts, with motions. So they're going to test the eye discipline of the defense whenever it fits. Sometimes it fits more than others. But in other words, they're going to do whatever they need to do to create a matchup. And I think one of the matchups that could favor us, we talk about last week, Devin Carter sliding into the slot and now being a dual threat as both a perimeter presence at Exozika and the slot. Well, why would Neil do that? You heard him say, well, he wanted a free release. And what he means by that is slots are typically off the ball instead of on it. So if you're on the perimeter, you're on the ball usually, which means that a press corner is right up against you and get hands on you off the ball. Whereas if you're in the slot, you get a pretty clean release because that defender has to run a risk because you're, a yard off the ball. So he can't just reach out and grab you on the snap.
Sure.
So we moved Devin there, and he had a lot of success. So I would expect moving forward to see him play both the slot and outside. And you might, in fact, have an opportunity to get a matchup of Devin Carter against Trey Rucker. Now, that's not what Oklahoma State wants. That's what Brian Nardo is going to try and prevent. That's the cat and mouse of it. You might have a Colt Taylor matchup against Trey Rucker. So there are some things that we can do from a personnel standpoint that we'll try and do. But life is quite simply going to have to be made easier by running the football. And if, in fact, we can get Wyatt back, like that looks like a promising possibility, not only to help against Colin Oliver, but in addition to that, to help in the run game as well. And we can be more balanced in what we want to go about. We can really have a 3-dimensional offense. I always say not 2-dimensional, but 3-dimensional. Run the football, throw the football, play action, and RPO. So there are your 3 dimensions. So if we can take what Garrett and the wideouts and the O-line from a pass pro standpoint and the tight ends did last week, and the running backs were a part of what we did in the past game too.
Sure.
If we can do that and build on it and continue down that path on that course, instead of just that being the one-off that we talk about a month from now. Why can't we throw it like we did against Houston? Well, yeah, Houston had some struggles in the back end, and we did an effective job of game planning that. But I do think we developed some swagger and some confidence in that game that potentially you can build on. And there are some opportunities against this Oklahoma State defense you're gonna have to demonstrate patience. That's the nature of facing the odd stack. You're going to have to demonstrate patience and to some extent nickel and dime. But if you nickel and dime, you'll look up and you'll have a quarter at some point, or at least an opportunity one, maybe even a Susan B. Anthony. If you're going to have some opportunities present themselves, if in fact you have the patience to stick with the script and pick up those 3, 4, 5 yard gains. So yeah, I see some opportunities, Wes, there. Now I want to toss it back to you. Big picture,
Sure.
Our offense, their defense. We'll get into their offense here in a minute, but what do you see? We're coming off a game where we obviously struggled so mightily in space to tackle. They've got playmakers. They always do. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, a couple things here that you touched on that I'd like to highlight. That we bring up that turnover statistic, right? How only once since Baylor has WVU won the turnover margin. They've been neutral. They've drawn a few times, but only once have they won it since that Baylor game last year, which was on October the 13th. I can look because that's the ticket stub right there, as I pointed out before. The first game that Big O and I went to together. Jed, as you and I record this, it's October 16th. When this drops, it's going to be like the 18th. I mean, it's to only win one turnover margin in a calendar year, yet still have WVU's win-loss record in that time is honestly impressive in its own regard. But you also look at that and you say, man, imagine where we could be if we got that moving in the right direction. So I think after a week where that wasn't your greatest strength, you lost the turnover margin. Now, to be fair, once again, I think the defense is looking back on that saying, man, we should have had some takeaways. We should have had some interceptions as well, too. But I think you can say the same thing for our offense as well, too, that they were probably fortunate to not have one or two more turnovers, as you highlighted in the Houston recap episode. So for me, this is one of those weeks to get that right. You've got an Oklahoma State team who clearly has a formula over these 2 wins throughout the state of Kansas, right? Well, in Stillwater, but against the state of Kansas, I should say, being +5 in those 2 games. That has to be at the forefront of your mind. The tackling thing, as you mentioned again, some of that stuff and how Oklahoma State has been hot and cold in that regard. I mean, Jed, this feels like the most cliche thing for me to say, but a lot of what I've been reading so far in myself with Oklahoma State and then everything you just kind of laid out there, this feels like a real fundamentals type game. Right. I mean, Mike Gundy's been preaching the blocking and tackling. Right. I mean, that's blocking and tackling is the crux of fundamental football. 101 is blocking and tackling. Right. And then the turnover battle. And then, as I mentioned, too, WVU went into that Houston game, bottom 5 in all of Power 5 football in terms of penalties called on them. And you had way too many. So it sounds like the most cliche, non-in-depth thing. But a lot of this stuff really, to me, is just in the minutia. The turnover battles, the tackling, the penalties, the execution in that regard, if you will. This feels like hey, we've both had 6 games to this point, right? So we are at the point now where the sample size is starting to get large enough, and you are who you are at this point in the season. You're not going to, in all likelihood, and 99% of the time, you don't get drastically better or you don't get drastically worse from here, right? You kind of are what you are. You've done most of your growth. Everything is on tape through 6 games.
Yes.
It's time to go execute those basics at home. And again, I know that sounds like the most cliched, like your mother-in-law could have just given you the analysis that I did, but it really does feel as simple as that. I will say, I liked what you mentioned there with Devin Carter. And as you said that, and maybe it's just Jed because I've been watching some LA Rams tape this week is my real day job. The Steelers prepare for the Rams. Mm-hmm. I got to be careful because sometimes when you make these comparisons, people go, oh my God, what are you talking about? The way that you describe Devin Carter there to me, and I agree, is Cooper Kupp-esque in my mind. Now, I know Cooper Kupp is one of the best wide receivers in the NFL over the last handful of years. All right. I'm not calling Devin Carter Cooper Kupp, but if you watch how the Rams use him, he lines up everywhere. He's split out to the right. He's split out to the left. They line him up in the slot. They line him up wherever they think they can get the matchup advantage. There's not we have to have Cooper Kupp on the outside. We have to have Cooper Kupp on the inside. We have to have Cooper Kupp where he can make the most hay. And I have a feeling you have the opportunity to do that against Oklahoma State as well, too, with him. And what feels like, I know you heard him say this week, he's really just starting to develop that chemistry with Garrett Green. They didn't have a ton of time to work together throughout the course of this season with some injuries that he had leading up to the Duquesne game. And then obviously the injuries that GG sustained in the Pitt game and missing the Texas Tech game as well, too. So those are, just some of my thoughts on everything you touched on there. But you know what, like we've talked a lot about the run game and CJ and Jalen and these things, man, you build upon what you did last week in Houston in the passing game, and just organically, that's going to open up a lot of stuff for those guys in the run game as well, too. So I am optimistic that the offense has had a lot of different setbacks. You've had key injuries all over the place, to your quarterbacks, to your best wide receiver, to the entire left side of your offensive line, right?
Great point.
This feels like the week where maybe you finally got all those bullets in that holster, and this would be a hell of a time for it to all come together.
Well, Gundy has talked about simplifying things. So it's always a game of execution, particularly against a team that's simply going to try and out-execute you. Houston wasn't going to try and beat us by out-executing us. All right. They have playmakers. They're going to try and put them in space and make more plays than we made. Mike Gundy has reinvented his football team and done a great job in doing so by going back to the basics of execution. So,
blocking and tackling.
Some of the things that we saw play out. And I'll close with some offensive numbers, and then we'll pivot to defense. But back to the third downs, because to me, so many other things are downstream from third down success. And that is one of the only things that we've been lacking, okay? Along with, we saw two things remedied despite the loss in Houston. Big plays, splash plays. And not just the pass game. We need to see him in the run game too. But third down success, which we haven't had all year, irrespective of the 4 straight wins. We hadn't had a lot of success on third down. So if you break it down the way that I'm talking here, third and short, we're going to call it third and 1 to 3. To be a top level offense, in my estimation, you got to be clicking when it's 1 to 3 yards, run and pass combined. You got to be clicking at 75% or north of that. Against Houston, okay, I'll give you the bad news first and the good news. The bad news for the year, we're 50%. That's where we're hurting ourselves. We're not making the most of third and short. We're getting in third and short. We're not making the most of it. Now, part of it, again, to some extent, baked into the equation, when you go for it as much as Neil does on fourth down, sometimes you're angling toward the fourth down on the third down call.
Hold on. Do you need to cough there or something?
I got a cough drop in.
You're getting red. You're getting red in the face. You look like a warhead over there, Jed. Right? If you need me to fill here for 20 seconds so you can clear your throat, just let me know, brother.
I got my fisherman's friend broken out. It's already that time.
We had someone in our YouTube comments who was like, "I'm worried about Jed. He's not worried."
Yeah, thank you, by the way.
I don't want anybody worried about your well-being.
Well, it's like, my wife was pointing out that last week, Jed, you were in Cleveland on Sunday. You were in Houston on Thursday night. Now tonight, I'm in Raleigh. So yeah, it's catching up. But
you do look like. Wait, hold on, real quick. When we did the ITG no huddles last season, what was the name that you had for Owen?
Oh, Professor Schmidt.
Okay, with his couch and everything.
Yes,
like you're looking like Professor Schmidt there a little bit. I mean, you got the bed and the mirror in the background. Wow. And also, Skylar and I were talking about this during the break. Do you have like an automatic camera? Your camera's like panning. It's great. It's like you got your own photographer there on videographer there. It's like panning with you wherever you go. When you back up, it backs up. When you move, it moves.
I noticed. It's strange you say that. I thought I was losing my mind, but last night.
Well, you might still be losing your mind, but.
Well, yeah, that's a separate issue. But I noticed that when we were taping the Picks episode, because I typically.
Every time when you lean forward, it look like it's getting you. That's incredible.
I didn't tell you guys this, but Spielberg's actually in the room with me.
I gotta say, I mean, you got Dave Filoni in the background there. Jesus,
I got Dave Filoni back there. He powdered me up before I came on. But yeah, I noticed that when we were doing the Picks episode, because I'm not on my laptop, which I usually am when I'm at home in my office. I'm having laptop issues, charging issues. Trust me, that's a whole separate issue that I'm terrified I need to get fixed in the next couple of days. But I'm kind of limping along on my iPad. And the iPad somehow has some default setting, I guess.
Is it a newer iPad? Like, when did you buy it?
I didn't buy it. My day job provided it during this time. Yeah, it's not mine. But yeah, that's the truth of it. But
it's
I
funny.
noticed that. Yeah,
it's I'm telling you, you could go stand in the corner of your hotel room and that thing would
follow
find you. It's amazing.
I'd be like that painting
of.
My mom and dad have a painting of Jesus at the bottom of the steps back in their house. And I swear it's everywhere you go. It's like Jesus is watching you. It's like his eyes.
Jed, that's because Jesus is watching you.
That's true. Right? That's true. That painting of Jesus, I should have said. But
sorry to interrupt you there. I just had to bring that up. It was like I said, Skylar and I were talking about it during the break. It was like when we went to break, you like went and got up to get something out of your bag, and you were talking still, and it was like panning towards you.
So we got to find a way to pivot from our Lord and Savior back to third and intermediates here. That's going to be tricky, right? So the goal is 75-80% on third and short. We're at 50% for the season. Not nearly good enough, but at Houston, we were 4 for 5. We were 80%. Keep that going. Now, third and intermediate, 4 to 6 yards. First, you earn those with some success on first or second or both downs. So you stay out of third and long. We're only at 42%. We got to get cranking on those things. You have to be talking to 60% because at some points you got to make up and compensate for your deficiencies on third and long because everybody's going to suffer on third and long. We're 19% on third and 7 or longer. So that's what I'm going to say about that. And then finally, one thing about Garrett. When you look at Garrett's numbers, one of the things I've been trying to break down is we've been pushing the football past 20 yards. We have a bit of a vertical pass game. That's one of the things that we're trying to look at. So I'm looking at Garrett's numbers, and I have them in his career broken down. If I can just track it down right here. There we go. I got it right here.
I love it.
I got it right here. Okay, so this is 2023. I have his numbers. So he's 11 of 26. This is any pass play 20-plus yards downfield. So he's 11 of 26 for 447 yards, 5 touchdowns, and a pick. That's the first pick that he threw. And that was actually the pick in the end zone. That was 20 yards to Jalen. So he's throwing the football deep well. And if you combine that to the limited throws that he had 20-plus yards in the past, he's completed 41% of his throws over 20 yards in his career, 627 yards, 7 touchdowns, 1 pick. But I'm going to give you 2 numbers to stick with. And then I'm going to provide some frame of reference for you against previous Mountaineer quarterbacks more recently. Remember these 2 numbers. 20-plus yards is what we're looking at, okay? The 2 numbers that I want you to look at, completion percentage and yards per attempt, because yards per attempt reflect how much bang you're getting for your buck. It factors in your completion percentage and how many yards you're getting on each one of these throws, kind of all together. So yards per attempt, the higher it is, the better off you are, and you're getting something in value for these plays. So Garrett's numbers, completion percentage for his career, 20-plus yard attempts. Here you go. Completion percentage, ready? 41%. Yards per attempt, 16.1 yards per attempt. That means nothing to you until I start going through previous quarterbacks. So Garrett, what were they, Wes? 41 and 16. JT Daniels last year, 15 and 40. I don't need all that. Just 33%, 10.2 yards per attempt. So Garrett's 6 more yards per attempt and 8% higher in his completion rate. Let's go back to Jarrett. For Jarrett's career, this is his career at West Virginia. I didn't count the Bowling Green. For his career, 35%, 10.7 yards per attempt. You see what I'm saying? There's something to be found in what Garrett is starting to lean into. Austin Kendall, for the better part of that one season, 27%, 11.4 yards per attempt. Again, Garrett, 41%, 16 yards per attempt.
All right, now give me the Willie G numbers. Come on now.
Willie G. Now, I'm going to ask you first. And again, just like you said about Cooper Kupp, we're not making comps here. That's not what we're doing. We're just giving you a simple frame of reference. What's Garrett's completion percentage?
41.
41. What is Garrett's yards per attempt?
16.
16.1. So
16.1
completion percentage. Garrett's is 41%. Willie G's 40%. Garrett's yards per attempt is 16.1. Willie G's 16.4. See what I'm saying? 2 thumbs up. Give us the. There we go. There we go. That was definitely warranting a 2 thumbs up.
I love it. That's a great dig by. Listen, when I'm listening to when I'm sitting in a car for 2 hours in LA traffic on Saturday, I better hear you give that stat.
Well, and I'll say this: there's people listening. Hey, he's calling, Garrett Green, Will Green. No, I'm not. I'm not.
I called Devin Carter Cooper Kupp, so you're all right.
No, you didn't. That's the whole point. Okay, let's keep going. Let's keep going to Skyler, because when I think of Skyler, I think of a gritty, deep ball kid.
Skyler Callahan? Oh, you mean Skyler Callahan?
Yes. Skyler Callahan. I think of both of them as gritty, deep ball kids. When I think of Skyler Howard, I think of a gritty kid who hit a lot of deep balls. He was consistently among the deep ball leaders. I mean, he was right there with Baker, chasing Baker in those days. So in the Big 12 standings, as far as deep balls go. So again, Garrett, 41%. Skyler, and I think he's an exceptional deep ball quarterback, 32%. Garrett, 16.1 yards per attempt. Skyler, 12.6 yards per attempt. So at this early stage, and that's strange to say about a kid who's been here 4 years, of Garrett's career as a passer, okay? But we're only a handful of starts into this, and plus sporadic spot play. So in this early stage, I've been looking at this, I've been monitoring this, but I didn't want to be too premature with it. I did think it kind of took an effort where he pushed the football vertical with some success over the balance of 60 minutes before I wanted to talk about this. And now that he's added that effort at Houston, I thought this was a pretty apropos and good time to bring that up. So as far as where he's at in his career right now, he's thrown 39 deep balls. He's off to a pretty good start. He's thrown 1 pick, 7 touchdowns. So, yeah, I mean, he's protecting the football in those deep throws. Yeah, I mean, all those are numbers that you can win with. So that's what I wanted to close the offense with, and we'll knock the defense and special teams out so we can get out of here.
Well, Mr. Drenning, before we spin the block real quick, a thank you to our guy Rick Lewis and Fortis. Of course, we all know the best commercial roofing business in the dang country, baby. For roof performance and financial certainty guaranteed. Make sure you visit fortis.us.com. All right, Jed, defense and special teams. Talk to me, partner.
Let's go situational first, because we love to do that. West Virginia's defense, Oklahoma State's offense. Irrespective of the things that failed us against Houston. Let's start in the end zone. This is something that did hurt us in that loss. We didn't play solid football. Houston had kind of had their way with us, especially in the second half, at any point in the field, including the red zone. We were among the best in the conference going into Houston from a defensive holding them to field goals or to nothing instead of touchdowns in the red zone. But unfortunately, that number has ballooned up to 50%. So half the time, it's still nowhere near where it was with our struggles last year. It's good enough for 5th in the Big 12. We've kind of been spoiled through 5 games. We were toward the top of the Big 12, but after the effort at Houston, our touchdown percentage in the red zone dropped to 50%. So half the time the opposition's reaching the end zone, reaching the red zone, they're now reaching the end zone. We got to get that number back down to where it was, to a much more manageable, under 40 type situation. Oklahoma State's offense, 57%, kind of middle of the pack, 9th in the Big 12. So nothing remarkable, but we just got to fix our own problems, and the rest should take care of itself in the red zone defensively. From a third down standpoint, again, this has kind of been what's buttered our bread defensively all year. And Houston didn't really gash us quite as much with that because they found their rhythm and didn't hit as many third downs, or didn't find themselves at as many on some of their scoring drives. Some of their scoring drives, I think, were 4, 5, 6 plays. I mean, matter of fact, most of them. But we came out of that game. We're still tied for first with Texas, holding the opposition to 28% success offensively on third down. That is championship level third down defense. That's what that is. Mm-hmm. Now, Oklahoma State offense. Talk about a matchup that should favor us. They're struggling pretty in a big way. 36%. That's only good for 12th in the Big 12. So when you ask yourself, all right, what are your concerns offensively when you look at what they're trying to do, what they've tried to do with, first of all, Casey Dunn. He was named their coordinator last year. They've cycled through, Mike Yursich left. They've had some big name guys through the years, including Dana. I mean, when you look at some of the OCs that have worked their way through Oklahoma State, it's kind of been a landing spot for larger, better destinations. From Mike Yursich moves on to Ohio State. Now he's at Penn State. Todd Monken did some bigger things. Obviously, we know what Dana did beyond his time there. But Casey Dunn is a guy that is a longtime member of that staff. He represents continuity. He became the OC last year. He's in his second year in that capacity now. So I would imagine if you're sitting in staff meetings, he's one of those guys who kind of finishes Gundy's sentences for him. So that kind of thing matters from a brain trust standpoint when you're trying to develop different ways to attack. If you've ever sat in one of those meetings, that kind of trust matters. So Casey Dunn can do some creative things. He's got weapons scattered across from a skill point standpoint. We got to start with Ollie Gordon. What he did last week in that upset win against Kansas was special, both on the ground and in the air. I mean, he went triple digits as a runner, but they've used him very effectively. And when you watch tape, they do a nice job, speaking of matchups, of finding ways to get him isolated on very favorable matchups for them. So he's actually tied among Big 12 running backs with the tied for the most catches among Big 12 running backs on the season with 17. And you do see that when you study the tape, whether it's against a backer or even a nickel back in some instances, if they like the matchup, they'll do some of that. So that's one of the things that you have to monitor closely. But when you look at the quarterback situation with Alan Bowman is a guy that, here's what's strange. We've faced him before, and this just speaks to how long he's been around. West Virginia has faced him before. We knocked him out of the game in 2018, but right. Neil Brown and Jordan Leslie haven't. That's how long he's been playing college football.
That's like Malachi Ruffin, right? And being around the last time we beat Texas Tech before this season started.
Yes, that's exactly right. So, we faced him, but they haven't. So, he spent 3 years at Texas Tech in one system, transferred to Michigan, and say what you want about Michigan, but I promise you, he got some high-level quarterback coaching when he was at both those spots. So he comes in as a master of the position, and he's played better football in the last couple of weeks. Now, he hasn't been picked off many times. He's limited the turnovers, but when you watch the tape, much like the conversation we had about Donovan Smith last week, I wondered if we might find ourselves on the winning end of a couple of turnovers because Donovan Smith tended to put it in harm's way. He didn't against us, but he had in the past. And I kind of see the same thing with Bowman. He puts the football sometimes in harm's way and has gotten away with doing so far. So can we stop dropping the picks? Can we be in position to make the picks? These are all questions that we have to look at. But we have to impact him. First, you got to contain, Gordon. I mean, Gordon's going to be what makes him offensively. Brennan Presley's the weapon on the perimeter, but Brennan Presley's kind of the cherry on top when Gordon gets cranking. They do some creative things when they push the football down the field with Brennan Presley. They'll also jet sweep him. They'll move him around. They'll try and find some matchups that they like with him. He's been there for quite some time. West Virginia defensively, despite what happened last week, and in large measure, I think it's part of the reason that happened last week. We lead the Big 12 with 69 quarterback hits. We have quarterback hurries. We have 42 quarterback
Wait, hold on real quick, Jed. How many?
42.
No, quarterback hits.
Hits, 42.
Oh, quarterback hurries, how many?
Hurries, 69. Yep.
Nice.
Okay. Okay.
Listen, I'm sorry. I've had like 3 beers and I'm still slightly immature. I couldn't let that slide.
Well, guess how many times we did that to Donovan Smith last week? We knocked him to the ground once. So there was a direct correlation between the number of times we were laying the wood to quarterbacks, whether we were sacking them or not. We were getting hits on them. We were knocking them to the ground. And going into that game in Houston last week, we had held opposing quarterbacks to a Big 12 best 50% completion rate. Well, when you hit Donovan Smith one time, he doesn't come out and complete 50%. He completes almost 80. He's 21-27.
Right.
So we have to get back to the business of making life difficult for the opposing team's quarterback. In this case, that's going to have to be Alan Bowman. So stop dropping those picks, impact the quarterback. Let's snap this streak of games without a turnover and end this thing at 5. We're one of just 5 teams in the country. We haven't recovered a fumble yet this year. And typically you see that of defenses that don't get a lot of hats around the football. But we do get a lot of hats around the football. So we have to continue the things that we've done well, even the things that we didn't do as well. Last week at Houston, we missed a dozen tackles. But if you want to look at the corners, I did a comparison of Beanie and Malachi, and this is including what happened last week at Houston. Beanie has been targeted 34 times, given up 18 catches, 202 yards. 11.2 yards per catch. He's only allowed 45 total yards after catch. They're doing an exceptional job of limiting the number of yards that kids make after they do catch the football on them. 1 touchdown, 2 picks. He's could have had a couple more, as we've talked about. Malachi has been targeted 24 times. He's only allowed 10 catches. I mean, I'm telling you, Malachi Ruffin is really growing on me. He's allowed 9.6 yards per catch. He's only allowed 33 yards after the catch. 1 touchdown, 1 pick. So holding up their own. Both have challenges that come in their own forms, but both, I think, have exceeded any expectations that anybody could have reasonably had for them. And they're playing pretty solid football on the perimeter for us. Now you just need a bounce back effort based on what happened against Houston. Because the thing about it wasn't even necessarily Houston carving us up from a man standpoint. I mean, first of all, the thing that did jump out at you in watching that tape and watching Houston on tape before they played us was their speed at the skill positions offensively. They've got guys who can run. And even when we were dropping into zones, I saw from the sidelines some open guys in those zones that Donovan Smith didn't even see. So it's difficult to leave some things on the table when you go 21 to 27, but he did. So we've got to shore that up. And the easiest way to shore that up is get back to the business of making life difficult by pressuring him. So that's kind of the way you look at it. We have to continue that distribution from a snap count standpoint. You know, I was talking to Coach Jackson in the hotel the night before the game, and I asked him, I said, how are you doing this? Because when I look at the season-long snap counts, this rotation, you got Eddie V and Sean Martin and Big Mike and Tommy and Jalen Fatorma, D. Hawkins, Asani. You're getting all these guys in, and it's right at about the number of snaps per game that you want them. I said, I can't imagine in these moments of chaos, under fire and duress, that you're able to chart this and just say, all right, you have 6, get out there for 6. He said, no. He said, Jed, honestly, it's just a feel. I said, well, you got a pretty good feel on it. You got your thumb on the pulse of what's happening in that room, because that rotation is just about exactly where you'd want it. So keep that feel trucking. And that's working very effectively. So we're going to need to keep doing that. If you want to jump on to special teams, their punters have combined to force 16 fair catches. That is the most in the Big 12. They've only allowed 10 punt returns. Or they've allowed 10 punt returns. That's the second most in the Big 12. Put those numbers together, that tells you they punt a lot. Okay?
Sure.
Now, West Virginia.
Time for Pac-Man Fox to have himself a
Pac-Man
game.
Fox has the most punt returns in the Big 12. He's returned 13. Now, you want a recipe for returning a lot of punts? How about this? You have the number 1 ranked third down defense.
I know where you're going with this.
And you're not forcing any turnovers. Right? You're going to return a whole lot of punts. So see if we can find some hidden yardage there. He's actually Pac-Man Fox. Here's a number for you. You ready for a number for Pac-Man Fox?
I'm ready.
He is the first Mountaineer, and we're 6 games into this thing. He's the first Mountaineer with over 140 punt return yards in a season since
Pac-Man Jones.
No.
Winston Wright.
Tavon. 2012.
Mario Alford would have been my next guest. So
2012 Tavon. So that's the recipe for a lot of opportunities. Now, Ollie Straw is going to have to play a role, as he always does. He's pinned teams inside the 20 11 times, inside the 10 5 times. He's forced 11 fair catches. I don't think enough is said about his directional punting. That's one of the considerations. When you look at him from a hang time standpoint, that's not his strength. That's not his go-to. He's 0.7 seconds a kick, which that's not going to rank anywhere, even in the top half of the league. But we're asking him to do a lot of skill things directionally and otherwise. And, Brendan Presley and on the line, Oklahoma State is another one of those schools that you just know are going to have kids who can make plays in the transition and return unit. So you better be ready. Now their punters have pinned 12 inside the 20. But only 2 inside the 10. So they're not quite the dead-eyed dick that Ollie Straw is, but they're pretty good at it. Now, Oklahoma State might, in fact, have the best place kicker in the entire Big 12. The kid isn't just accurate, but he has some boom to him. He's 15 of 18. He has a league best 3 field goals of 50-plus, so he's 3 for 4 from long range. So just like you might expect from a Mike Gundy coach team, solid in the special teams units. They're going to confuse you on defense. It's a kind of a different animal than what we've seen in previous presentations that came to Morgantown.
Sure.
The only common thread is they're tough to beat. They always are. Again, how many people counted them out as dead after a 33-7 loss at home? There you go. It was easy to do against the South Alabama team. Hasn't materialized. Didn't even want South Alabama. I was thinking to myself, Wes, there was part of me. I was thinking, well, South Alabama had a good UCLA team beat on the road last year. They're very underrated, but they haven't turned out the way that I thought they would.
No,
this was more obviously about it. It was all about Oklahoma State.
Yeah, no, Jed. I was saying this with some of my buddies. You know, I got a group text with all my old WVU buddies, and we text at nauseum about the football team, the basketball team, anything and everything in between. And I said to them on Saturday, it would have been that, man, all of a sudden, I'm much more worried about this Oklahoma State game than I was a couple weeks ago, but I feel much better about the UCF game than I did a couple weeks ago. It's been a tale of two different starts and how they've responded since then for those two teams. You're right. I mean, a lot of people, like I said, I raised my hand, myself dead in the water, had this, a couple weeks ago circled as an easy win. Oklahoma State's fallen apart. Maybe this is the end of Gundy. And just like the Phoenix, they have risen from the dead. So big game.
It's almost like when you stop and think about this. Back in 2016, because I was texting, again, my buddy out at Oklahoma State, my insider, okay, he was texting me to commiserate over sources. What happened to us? He's like, oh man, Jed, I feel for you. That's a tough one. I said, the only thing that I can come up close to that kind of final situation is I remember the untimed down. You remember when Central Michigan beat Oklahoma State? You remember the circumstances surrounding that 7 years ago?
The untimed down?
Yeah, that should not have taken place.
Was that 7 years ago?
7 years ago, yeah. The NCAA apologized to Oklahoma State. Whoops, we blew the call. You're right. We shouldn't have let them run that play, that untimed down. Central Michigan got the ball back. What happened was Oklahoma State threw the ball away to take the clock out, and it should have ended the game. But Central Michigan was allowed one on-time down. They threw a Hail Mary, and the kid ran into the end zone. Well, you talk about a gut punch. That was early in the season, okay? And that was a Central Michigan team. Wes, I think they went on to win 6 games. They weren't very good in the MAC. Now, guess what Gundy's team did after that?
They went on a roll, didn't they? Won like 9 or 10 straight, didn't they?
10 games. That was a 10-win Gundy team. So they could have folded the tents. They could have felt sorry for themselves, much like they could have with South Alabama. It's not the first time we've seen Mike Gundy do this. So that's why Phil Steele said, Gundy's been doing this a long time. Don't count him out. And he's right. Gundy came out of that bye week. They've been a reinvigorated team, a renewed team. They're going to come to town. We're absolutely going to take their best shot. You know the last time we beat them in Morgantown?
2013. Sorry,
2013.
2013.
Clint's first start, the Bumblebee game. Clint's first
that was the last game last football game that I worked as a student with Sean and Big and Chris L.
That's our last win against Oklahoma State in Morgantown. So you want to talk about a revenge tour? Yeah, technically we beat them last year, but come on. I mean, they have
I like it.
They have had our number. Yeah.
I told you about my revenge trifecta earlier in the week. How my revenge trifecta coming into the season was Pitt, was Texas Tech, was Dana. Well, you know what? Let's kick Dana out of there and let's get the Cowboys in there,
put them
baby. And you know what? This is still a couple weeks away, but Keaton Slovis is on that list as well, too, all right? Not BYU, but Keaton Slovis. I remember him with his little peacock chest grabbing that microphone and the things he said about, not thumbs up Zoom, thumbs down when it comes to Keaton Slovis. I was gyrating with my hands, and you've got the camera panning back and forth. We are off the rails. This has been a long episode.
Am I on camera? Let me look at this.
Jed, what you need to do, yes, you are. What you need to do is go out in the hallway and start talking and see if it picks you up.
I'm wheeling my chair around. Boy, that is
incredible.
Thank you, Spielberg.
I'm telling you, when we went to break, you went up to go to the bathroom or whatever, and it was following you. Skylar and I were like, what the hell is going on here?
I feel like one of those guys that they put out the car dealership that's blowing the wind. We went back. Me and my boys got back together on Saturday, Wes. My old teammates we had a reunion. Glenville set it up. They did a nice job. It was the 30th anniversary of our 1993 national championship team.
Nice.
The runner-up. And the 50th anniversary of the 73 national championship runner-up.
Nice.
And the guy, I mean, there were several of us under this tiny little tent. It was raining like crazy. We had a blast. We were there a couple hours and then took off. But some of us stayed, some of us couldn't. But it was a blast. But the old blowy guy, okay, they had one of the blowy guys behind the Waco Center that I built for the basketball team. It's right behind the stadium that Ike Morris built over there. Well, we had the blowy guy. Well, our strong safety, Ed Kowchuk. One of the first guys I saw was Tommy Reed, our free safety. And Kowchuk walks up, and Kowchuk was half nuts anyway. I mean, he's a PA kid, Homer Center. He's a hard-nosed kid. Dude, I think he'd been drinking 3 days. I'm like, how's he even walking? And so he looked. I'm looking over at the Waco Center, and there's the blowy guy against the Waco Center. I was like, all right, Kowchuk. So we got together, and we drug Kowchuk over to the blowy guy, and we had him. I got the picture. We need to post them on the show here. I got Kowchuk posing with the blowy guy, and the blowy guy was much straighter than Kowchuk was. So, but anyway, I digress. You talk about going off on a tangent there, but I wanted to give a shout out.
I love it.
Anyway.
No, that's awesome. I'm glad you got to do that. That's really cool. It's great that you guys are all still in touch and getting together like that. I mean, that's what it's all about, without a doubt. Man, Jed, this has been a lot of fun. I've enjoyed this episode tonight. That we had some good headlines to kick around, and then obviously a nice one to sink our teeth into. I like to think, I joked with you guys a few weeks ago, right, about how I listen to everything, I watch everything, I read everything, I self-scout. I mean, this is my industry, right? This is my football. Like I am an evaluator of myself and others in this process, right? I look at everything, I listen to everything. I'm very self-aware. I think that's one of my good traits in this business.
Go ahead,
and with that, look at you. I mean, what are you doing here? One of the things that I'm self-aware about is I realize already this season, 4 different times I've said, this is a big one. This is a crossroads. This is a season defining moment for WVU. I said it for the Pitt game. I said it for the Texas Tech game. I said it for the TCU game. And you're damn right, I said it for the Houston game. Jed, like we talked about, this can still be a special season. Maybe that 2000. And I was thinking about this more in the wake of the Houston episode reaction that we recorded. I think in my lifetime, WVU has had one dream season. And I define a dream season as you win your conference, you win a bowl game, a major bowl game, and you finish in the top 10 of the rankings. That to me is a dream season as a WVU fan. We've had a lot of great seasons in my lifetime, but I think the only dream season was that 2005, that Sugar Bowl team with Big O and Pat and Steve. They had some other great seasons. Despite what happened in the Pitt game and the opportunity for the national championship, they still had a great year overall that year in winning the Fiesta Bowl. Winning the Orange Bowl was a great season in 2012. I would even argue 2016, going 10-2 was a great season. A lot of things that Don Nealon was able to do in 88 and in 93 were great seasons. Dream season might be out of your reach because, I mean, again, a dream season is 1, maybe 2 losses in a conference championship and a major bowl win and a top 10 finish. This can still be a special season, though, like I lined out. You can still get to 8 or 9 wins. You have that win over Pitt in the backyard brawl. To me, this is where we get back on the right track. These next 2 games are crucial. And like you said, we're not players, so we can kind of look ahead and project a little bit too. You can be 6-2 and still have all of that right in front of you, but it starts this Saturday at home. Like you said, a team you haven't beaten at home in a bleeping decade. Go get it done. It's all right in front of you. WVU opened as 3-point favorites, and now I think it's down to 2 or 2.5, something like that.
Maybe 2.5 at open. I don't know what it did after that.
Yeah, something right now. I mean, Vegas clearly again views this as one of those coin flip type games where they're giving the edge to the home team.
Yeah.
Go out there on homecoming weekend and get it done.
And we talked about it after the Houston loss with the recap. Look, things on a football field don't happen to you. They happen because of you. And at this juncture, the Houston result is in the rear view. There's nothing you can do to change that result. You have no control any longer over that result. But guess what you have complete control over? How you respond to that result. So let's respond the way that we need to against a bounce-back Cowboys team that's trending way up. They're one of the hotter teams in the league. I think it will be a meaningful win because I think that no matter what happens in Morgantown on Saturday, Oklahoma State's going to go steal some more. I mean, they're not done winning. So much like you feel about TCU, to some extent about Texas Tech, I mean, all these teams could get hot and beat anybody. So
certainly
we're
could.
starting to get some quality wins. Let's add to that list instead of the other list.
Our Mountaineers can get hot and beat anybody too. Let's go on another run here. Let's go on another 4-game win streak here, something like that, and let's do it starting at 3:30 on Saturday at Milan Puskar Stadium at Mountaineer Field. Jed, this has been a lot of fun, man, but we got to go. I mean, our producer, Skyler, I tell you what, he's working overtime here. Thanks to Skyler for putting this all together for us, as always. For Big O, and, of course, the signal caller, Jed Drenning. I am Wesley Euler. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, the one thing we ask of you, continue to spread the good word. Be an ear and tell an ear about your new favorite WVU football podcast. That'll do it for this edition of ITG, but we still got Phil Steele coming up this week, so plenty coming at you. I can't wait to hear you and Skyler talk to Phil and get his thoughts on this one, as he's been calling some of his shots with Gundy here lately. I'll be interested to see what he has to say about this one. Let's get it done. The thing that I always say to you guys before the home games too, if you're going to be there, do your part, right? Make sure you do your part in the stands. That's all we can ask if you're at the game. And we will be back as always to reconvene next week after some Phil Steele and after hopefully a big homecoming victory. For Jed's Steven Spielberg camera as well too. Take care, everybody. I watched Ace Ventura this week, so much like Jim Carrey would have said, take care now. Bye then. You've been in the gun.